Good morning, everyone. Welcome to New Perspectives in Integral and Transformational Learning, hosted by Auro University and Sri Aurobindo Integral Life Center in Surat and in Fountain Inn, South Carolina. It is a platform for exploration of new perspectives in integral education, social development, integral yoga topics, and art and culture. Our aim is to facilitate presentations and interactions of different experts and researchers in different fields of endeavor, creating an interdisciplinary and interactive platform where all perspectives may find their true place, leading to more harmonious and comprehensive ways of living. Today is a topic of utmost importance, the ideal of human unity, the future of mankind. And for this discussion, we invited two prominent speakers, Julian Lyons and Martha Orton. Martha is teaching courses online in psychology and philosophy of evolution of consciousness. She's the author of several books, and at the same time, she is the poetess, which is also a very interesting addition to her poems are very beautiful. And Julian is, of course, well known. He is representing Auroville International in USA. He is the head of Matagiri Center in New York. This center hosted Om conferences for many years. He is very supportive of all Auroville activities and fond of music and art. And so I welcome both of you to this session. We will organize it in such a way that Martha first will make a presentation for 15 or 20, maximum 20 minutes, and then Julian will speak for 15 minutes or 20 minutes, and at the end we will have questions and answer sessions. Please add your questions to this box, question and answers box, that we may answer them at the end of their presentations. Please, so I give microphone to Martha Orton. Please address the audience.
Thank you, Vladimir. It's a pleasure to be with you all today. My topic is the psychology of social development. In considering the psychology of social development from Sri Aurobindo's perspective, we necessarily engage with this perspective on reality and the human purpose. Without going very deeply into Sri Aurobindo's philosophical conceptualizations, we need to understand basically that he asserts the conception that the transcendent divine extended himself through his power of Satchidananda to become the universal self in the form of the manifest universe. This view of the creation is an essential understanding to all that follows, since it means that the divine is involved in the manifestation, literally present within it. Sri Aurobindo also asserts that what is involved must evolve, and that therefore the innate inherent divinity of the manifest material world must reveal itself and will ultimately do so, and with transformative result. We may ask then, what is our human purpose? Why are we here? In brief, the answer from Sri Aurobindo's perspective is that our purpose is to evolve, to grow in consciousness, so that we may help the entire manifest world progress towards its realization and manifestation of its innate divinity. We necessarily incorporate this understanding into our topic today, the psychology of social development, since the perspective on reality forms the basis of whatever follows. Any theory of social development will proceed from such a basis. In order for humanity to fulfill its evolutionary purpose, there is the inner drive which originates from its inherent divinity. This drive, Sri Aurobindo tells us, pushes us to seek perfection, to be dissatisfied with the status quo, and also to seek harmony in life, since harmony is associated with perfection and divinity. Also, harmony is a necessary expression of the underlying oneness of the manifest universe. It should be noted here that we need to consider that since all the manifest universe was created by the divine out of himself, the oneness of the universe and humanity within it is understood as truth. In fact, Sri Aurobindo tells us that nature itself seeks harmony as expression of oneness. So this is a deep inner drive within humanity. Sri Aurobindo also explains that human beings are mental creatures. Of course, we're also driven by physical and emotional needs and wants. But as mental beings, we are able to override these with the mind. We reflect and consider, analyze and assess. Consequently, we search for meaning. In fact, Sri Aurobindo's conceptualization of the psychology of social development can be studied in terms of a quest for meaning. In outlining the various stages of social development, which he conceives as symbolic, typal, conventional, individualistic or rational, commercial, subjective, and ultimately spiritual, we can see that the transition from one stage to another is prompted or motivated by each stage having lost some of its power of meaning. As the freshness and genuineness of each stage is lost due to the impact of events or it simply fades, and its meaning along with it, another stage evolves out of what went before. This occurs either in response or in reaction to the characteristics of the preceding stage. Of course, such transitions are not abrupt. They occur over extended periods of time. Also, some of the elements of all of these continue to exist intermixed to some degree in all stages. In addition, various stages can coexist in different parts of the world simultaneously. Essentially, we are on an evolutionary quest for the real meaning of life, perpetually dissatisfied until we fulfill this quest. To examine this progression effectively, let us look at the meaning Sri Aurobindo gives to these terms, beginning with the symbolic. He identifies the symbolic stage as associated with religion, religious imagery, and dynamic or deeply engaged practice. Sri Aurobindo describes this stage as characteristic of the early stages of human society and evinced by a symbolic mentality which profoundly influences the customs, institutions, and thought of a society. He writes of the symbolic stage, quote, "The symbol then is of something which man feels to be present behind himself and his life and his activities, the divine, the gods, the vast and deep, unnameable, a hidden living and mysterious nature of things. All his religious and social institutions, all the moments and phases of his life are to him symbols in which he seeks to express what he knows or guesses of the mystic influences that are behind his life and shape and govern or at least intervene in its movements." The first, the symbolic stage of this evolution is predominantly religious and spiritual. The other elements, psychological, ethical, economic, physical, are there, but are subordinated to the spiritual and religious idea, end quote. As the power of symbols and the meaning behind them begins to wane, a society moves into the typal stage. The symbols are less vivid and meaningful, and consequently pale in comparison with what they were before. I would like to offer a series of non-continuous quotations from Sri Aurobindo in the Human Cycle, which concisely describe these stages through the conventional age. The second stage, so I begin the quote here, the second stage, which we may call the typal, is predominantly psychological and ethical. All else, even the spiritual and religious, is subordinate to the psychological idea and to the ethical ideal which expresses it. Religion becomes then a mystic sanction for the ethical motive and discipline. The typal stage creates the great social ideals which remain impressed upon the human mind, even when the stage itself is past. The principal active contribution it leaves behind when it is dead is the idea of social honor, for the typal passes naturally into the conventional stage. The conventional stage of human society is born when the external supports, the outward expressions of the spirit or the ideal become more important than the ideal. The body or even the clothes more important than the person. The tendency of the conventional age of society is to fix, to arrange firmly, to formalize, to erect a system of rigid grades and hierarchies, to stereotype religion, to bind education and training to a traditional and unchangeable form. End quote. From these descriptions, we can see how one stage leads to another, also how the conventional age could not continue, for it had limitations which human nature cannot abide for long. An example of revolt comes in the late 19th century with the preeminence of science and the Industrial Revolution. As such influences came into play, the failure of conventional ideas and structures became increasingly evident. The individual emerges as prominent in his demands and expectations, and the individualistic age is upon us. Freedom of religion, freedom of expression in all forms becomes much more greatly recognized than previously. Sri Aurobindo explains that a time comes when the gap between convention and truth becomes so great that this seems intolerable and the intellect revolts. Intellect and reason challenge what has gone before in the previous stage. Sri Aurobindo tells us that the psychological cause of an individualistic age is the need to go back and rediscover the underlying substantial truths of life. Since these have been covered over by conventional standards, they have ceased to be living ideas and have lost their vibrancy. These seem to be suffocated by convention, and this sense of suffocation drives the individualistic age to seek the freedom needed to rediscover personal and societal truths. The rational and material emphasis and influence of science in the individualistic age can also lead to a new form of barbarism if the result is preoccupation with the material aspects of life. The results can be an age which is heavily economic and commercial, in which possession of material goods and the power of accumulating these overwhelms finer aims and values. The individualistic age, with its emphasis on rationality, once experienced for some time, begins to reveal its own insufficiency. This is even more true of the hollowness of the commercial age. Sri Aurobindo describes the ideal of the commercial age as the successful man. He writes, "To arrive, to succeed, to produce, to accumulate, to possess is his existence. The accumulation of wealth and more wealth, the adding of possessions to possessions, opulence, show, pleasure, a cumbrous inartistic luxury, a plethora of conveniences, life devoid of beauty and nobility, religion vulgarized or coldly formalized, politics and government turned into a trade and profession, enjoyment itself made a business. This is commercialism." End quote. In some ways, individualism and even commercialism enable the next stage through their emphasis on individual fulfillment in some form. Some of those living in these eras begin to seek deeper meaning and higher values through self-reflection, leading the way to the subjective age. Sri Aurobindo describes the subjective age in this concise quote: "The subjective stage of human development is that critical juncture in which, having gone forward from symbols, types, conventions, having turned its gaze superficially on the individual being to discover his truth and right law of action and its relation to the superficial and external law, truth and law of the universe, our race begins to gaze deeper, to see and feel what is behind the outside and below the surface, and therefore to live from within. It is a step towards self-knowledge, towards living in and from the self. Sri Aurobindo, that's the end of the quote. Sri Aurobindo describes idealism in the subjective age as resulting in a certain tendency to mysticism, occultism, and a search for self independent of the life of the body. Nevertheless, rationalism and materialism tend to prevail in relations between individuals, and especially in the organization of society in the subjective age. However, in the subjective age, there is a growing awareness of the interconnectedness. Sri Aurobindo describes the law of existence, which in its essence is being increasingly recognized. He writes, quote, "That law is that all things are one in their being and origin, one in their general law of existence, one in their interdependence and the universal pattern of their relations." End quote. The individual and its surrounding society are interrelated and interdependent. Each influences the other in an ongoing, continuous, and dynamic interchange. As the individual evolves and has new psychological aspirations as a result, this impacts the collective consciousness. Always, the collective consciousness always influences the individual. In this way, the evolution of society as a whole moves forward. Consequently, the individual and the society have a responsibility to each other. As Sri Aurobindo vividly describes, there is essentially a compact between the individual and society for their mutual benefit, emphasizing the importance of individual freedom and harmony in the society at large. So the overall goal of this societal evolutionary progression is the development of a perfect individuality within a perfect reciprocity, enabling the highest self-realization of both the individual and the surrounding society. Regarding spirituality as the only hope for the perfection of both the individual and society, Sri Aurobindo envisions such a culmination of humanity's quest for meaning and the fulfillment of its purpose in the spiritual age. Thank you.
Thank you, Martha. It was beautiful and very concise. The whole human cycle put into, into 15 minutes. Beautiful.
Thank you.
Yes, that's what we need. We need this kind of lead at the path to see how it is being embodied in Auroville. Auroville was the project to embody this new society. So now I would like to invite Julian to his part to speak on Auroville in 15-20 minutes maximum. And I must also mention that Julian is the president of Matagiri Sri Aurobindo Center in New York. And also he is the board member and executive director of Auroville International USA. And also he is on advisory council of Auroville. Please, Julian.
Thank you, Vladimir. Martha, I very much enjoyed your presentation. I'm in my senior years really benefiting from reading Sri Aurobindo. We have a morning reading for the members of Matagiri, and we've read through Savitri and Synthesis of Yoga and this wonderful collection of letters called the Integral Yoga, edited letters of Sri Aurobindo, and are now reading the Life Divine. And though I've read segments of these books for many years. I have not gone from page 1 to the end sequentially. And so it's a delight to, if I may paraphrase Frederick Spiegelberg, who is the great scholar in Stanford University, who knew Paul Tillich and was a big influence on Michael Murphy in the founding of Esalen. He says, I'm grateful to come to Sri Aurobindo so late in life to understand the breadth and depth of his vision. But it's a little poignant because I started in my 20s and really wanted to see the evidence that these great ideals were being put into practice, and to hear about Auroville, and to hear that there was a place where people with the highest ideals were wanting to manifest them and live them daily, and to be serious in their practice. And I was fortunate to meet some of the pioneers in Auroville, so I really, though I didn't visit until 74, I got to know people who were there from 1968, and even a wonderful woman, Ida Patterson, who was going to India in 66 when these first seeds of this idea of creating an international community dedicated to human unity. And one only needs look at the charter and to be a true Aurovillian, and Vladimir will help me by reading some of these later in our discussion, to share that these very high ideals have to land. And I remember Frederick, one of the pioneers in Auroville, when he was discussing with the mother of the Sri Aurobindo ashram about building, that she wanted to have him build a concrete, or as we use the Tamil phrase, paka house, to show that we were going to stay. This idea of engaging in the material world, and this dream that's from so many faith traditions, to have a new heaven and a new earth, and to do our best with all our failings to live our high ideals. So on this barren plateau in 1968, Auroville was dedicated with the sanction of UNESCO, and a tremendous effort to go where there was literally nothing. It was an area that used to be forested, which the colonial powers, the Dutch and the French and the British, variously cut down over the years. And it resulted in the monsoon rains coming and washing away the topsoil and creating ravines and gullies. And really, in the early days, when it rained powerfully, the Bay of Bengal would turn orange with the soil being washed off of this plateau just north of Pondicherry. And the moonscape of Auroville, those who could remember visiting in the early 70s, as I was fortunate to do, you could literally see the ocean, the Bay of Bengal, from anywhere on this plateau, and the beginning of the Matra Mandir, this meditation hall at the center. It was one of the first things that I could not understand, that if Auroville was going to be dedicated to spiritual practice and not any particular religion, why were they building a temple at the center, this Matra Mandir, this painting, you can see behind me my wife's rendition of up here the urn, where in 1968 the soil from 116 countries and all the states of India was put, and then this sphere. And over the years, I've come to realize how lacking we are in the world with the concept of the sacred feminine. Cathedrals, office buildings, the whole architecture and manifestation is always spires and these vertical towers. And at last, there's something feminine and receptive and meant for concentration. I remember some of you may have heard the name Ruud Lohman, who was a Catholic priest who'd come to Auroville and set aside his Catholicism and gave himself over to working on building this sacred space in the center of Auroville. And someone who saw the early building came by and yelled up above where he was on the scaffolding, "What are you building? A water tower?" And Ruud looked back and said, "No, a generator." So they were actually, in his sweet way, alluding to a transformation, something that was, as Martha so beautifully illustrated, going from these different stages of evolving society to a subjective age, and trying to bring something forth that's intuitive and receptive and guided by something other than this confounding ego, which is destroying the planet. And Auroville was very much involved also with environmental restoration. Those of you who know the ashram, Sri Aurobindo Ashram in Pondicherry, Gloria Farm was an organic farm. Udar Pinto, who was an engineer, aeronautical engineer, and confidant and secretary to the mother, talked to her about nuclear energy and saying that this was not the energy of the future. It was destructive, what we have, but that we needed to model based on the sun. If we're going to have that source of power, it should be fusion. These physical sciences have symbolic and ecological consequences. So the restoration of this moonscape to plant trees out of necessity because of the intense sun. Auroville is just 12 degrees above the equator. And then this wonderful, spontaneous evolution of the community in bringing people back in the mid to late 60s, the hippies, the French coming from the streets of Paris. There was sweeping around the world this search. And Indian philosophy and spirituality, and culturally through Ravi Shankar and the Beatles and so many people who were looking east, you could have everything in your life and still not be satisfied. Those of you who remember the Beatles singing "Money Can't Buy You Love," you know, this was a kind of answer to this materialism that Martha was talking about. And these young people with their aspirations ending up in this backwater. Pondicherry at that time was described in some article as a sleepy French backwater. It's certainly not that today, but in the early 60s, there were not so many cars. It was very quiet relative to what was going on elsewhere in the world. But it provided a canvas for these people to work out their ideals and make an experiment. and to participate in this incredible adventure, and to do it with some humility, with some sweetness, with some back to basics feeling, because many of them were stripped bare. There was no electricity. There were a few hand-dug wells, and this enforced voluntary simplicity and living off the land, eating what you grew, and then experimenting. Our friends, Robert and Deborah Lawler, they were growing algae to supplement the diet and using wind to stir the ponds. And now it's international industry in Auroville today. So the evolution of the community and the sophistication and the variation, I was thinking, to see Shakespeare performed in Auroville, the fact that they have a theater to do it, and that you have someone speaking in an Italian, in a Tamil, in a Gujarati, Indian, English, along with French, German, American. You hear Shakespeare like you've never heard it before, because each accent is bringing some particular unique contribution, and it's that we were holding a conference a few years ago and reflecting on the fact that Sri Aurobindo was a poet. He said, "I wrote philosophy because a yogi should be able to turn his hand to anything." But he did not consider himself primarily a philosopher. Mother, Mira Alfassa in Paris, when she was a young girl, was a painter and won a prize and studied art. So I do feel that the arts, which actually open oneself to write poetry or to paint, you have to open yourself to the intuitive. And I think this is part of the sadhana. Auroville is doing karma yoga work, but trying to open to intuition and trying to manifest these ideals of human unity in some practical, useful way. And interestingly, a lot of their work has become very relevant to the world in terms of the need to manage water resources, to restore a broken ecological system, and to work with nature. And Auroville has become a pioneer and a model for India for many of these very important ecological and hopefully someday spiritual contributions. Dr. Karan Singh, who is chairman of the governing board, often said, Mother said Auroville should be ruled by divine anarchy. And I can see that you've mastered the anarchy part. So let's try to work for the divine side. So that hopefully gives some background and some context for the questions and answers and discussion that we can have now.
Thank you, Julian, very much. It's very interesting to see how you feel, or these kind of impressions you got, your thoughts about what is going on in Auroville. Yes, I myself, being in Auroville from 92, I mean, of course it is much later than you came to Auroville, but still I lived there for more than 25 years. And of course I have this imprint in me of the new world emerging. And the emergence of the new world is not very visible. It's not something you can immediately, notice. People ask whether we realized the ideal or whether we came to some kind of outcome. But truly speaking, it's a very different path, unknown path, as Mother says. It's a laboratory of evolution where things have to be tried out, unknown things which were never tried before. So as we move into the subjective age, into the spiritual age, of course, these things will be worked out on the way. And that's what Auroville is about. And there are many pitfalls, there are many difficulties which we have to face, and because the world still persists in its own old paradigm of conventions, and especially in India. So the change is coming with difficulty. And here there is a first question we can see. With the internet technology available, this truly is a new age. The present discussion is an evidence of the interconnectivity among humans. Is Sri Aurobindo's vision being fulfilled? Are we living in a new world described in part by Sri Aurobindo? So, are we already in a new world?
I think in some ways we are. We know that Mother and Sri Aurobindo brought down the supramental force and grounded it here in the late 50s. Yet the commercial age is still strong in us and is battling it out, with the higher forces that will, of course, ultimately prevail. But the commercial age, as I was reading in the Human Cycle in preparation for today, I was reflecting very much on how we have strong elements of that now. But it's a rather comforting to know that Sri Aurobindo envisioned or saw clearly that the elements of one age can persist into another. It's not an abrupt transition. We're not suddenly newborn in a new age of consciousness, but the old elements are always struggling to persist. So we still have conventions, we still have typal societies in this world. We may still even have symbolic societies in some regions of the world. And in the West and in India, the commercial age is still strong, but the subjective age is coming. And in some ways, we are already there in terms of there being so many people who are interested in introspection, who do conscious, highly conscious self-reflection, meditation, various forms of yoga. Surely the subjective age is strong in us, even though we have elements of the commercial. And when you read what Sri Aurobindo writes in the Human Cycle about the promise of the spiritual age, it is so sublime and gives you so much hope. We know that evolution is ongoing. We can look back at the past and some of the atrocities people have committed, societies have committed, many of which would never be repeated again. So humanity is progressing in the evolution, not only materially in some ways, but certainly in the evolution of consciousness. And our interconnectivity, I think, in these days of the pandemic is very, very evident because, I mean, here we are, internationally connecting in this forum. What a fortunate thing to be able to do, and people are such social animals. We're driven to connect with each other. We can't help but do it. We're dependent on each other. And in these times, that interconnectivity comes out even more. And I think as spirituality grows, and Julian can speak to this, certainly from the perspective of Auroville, everything will gradually progress. There is the collective consciousness in the environment, the environmental consciousness, and there is an exchange in which we all do influence each other.
I had, thank you, Martha, become interested in communications and felt that this urge to have new paradigms was so necessary, and that through what at that time was the video revolution, growing up in New York City, some of you may remember there were the three major networks that are still there, CBS, NBC, and ABC. And now you have Fox dominating the evening news. And it was thought that with the proliferation of cable and now certainly with the internet, back then there was the hope that if we could talk about our ideals, that people would be drawn and inspired and be able to receive that information. What we did not understand is that with the proliferation of more channels for information, there are more opportunities for misinformation. And I remember thinking, we had all these dreams of a new communications revolution, and people were watching reruns of I Love Lucy, which had its entertainment value, but this is not what was going to help achieve food security for people, or to have fresh drinking water, and all of the real practical through Maslow's hierarchy of needs, food, shelter, clothing, we need those things, and then can pursue the self-actualization and the yoga that we all wanted to practice in order to receive intuitive guidance for the future. So yes, the new age is manifesting, and the tender shoots are coming up. And I like to say that, it's not trademarked. It can come through the practice of Tai Chi. It could come through what the Findhorn community was doing, growing the vegetables and trying to contact the devas, then the nature spirits. It can come through so many wonderful innovations in science, and I'm certainly looking towards India to break the monopoly of many international conglomerates and to innovate our way into cleaner energy. And in many cases, I heard a seminar the other day where India is closer to achieving its climate goals than many other countries. So I'm still having that great prayer that India's tremendous intellectual and spiritual capacity can combine, that the Western and Eastern new and higher synthesis can provide global leadership for the world in all these areas. And certainly that we try not to step on the tender shoots of the emerging spirituality as well.
Thank you, Julian. I have some questions to what you said, to both of you, by the way. First, maybe to Martha. You were speaking about subjective age, in which in this transition to the spiritual, let us say, stage, we would be still all those levels or ages are present in some way in us. There is conventionalism present, there is even symbolism in some way. The religions are also having some place in our society, and they are all turned into some kind of, new type of information or disinformation and propaganda, brainwashing people and so on, trying to grab the social kind of consciousness and to form individuals in a particular way. Especially it's visible in Russia and other countries, not only in Russia, actually in the West also, there was a shift towards, again, it's like a fall back a little bit, as Sri Aurobindo says, when the individuals are not managing, individualist stage is not really truly managing and falling into the grab of desires and darker influences of a darker vital consciousness, then there is a call to fall back into conventional age again. You see, we had such a good protection. We had a conventional age. There were laws and rules. Let us follow laws and rules. We should not discover the truth individually. We should discover it. We should hold on to social order, to the stipple order, which is protective and in some way secures the individual, helps the individual not to fall into the dangerous kind of state of consciousness. So we can see this falling back nowadays. So we are no more moving forward. There was a hippie time. Everybody was hoping for the future. Everybody came to Auroville enthusiastically. There was a different time, kind of. And now it's we are again inviting all those Varnik forces, typal forces back to secure ourselves. So I wanted to know how you view this, these levels or these ages present in the moment and how they play their roles. We can see this in every country nowadays. In Europe, there is a movement towards, and Putin gives a very good example. Trump is another example. So there is some kind of, some kind of mixed up time for us. And the subjectivity and this moving forward is not very clear. How would you comment on it?
You described it so well, Vladimir. I see it very much the same way. It is a very mixed time. It's a very challenging and difficult time. Sometimes when progress happens very rapidly for society, then the urge is to go back. Some people are not ready for change. Some elements of society resist it because of some vested interests or because in their inner nature, they're just not capable of making those changes at that time. So it's like with personal progress, our individual evolution is not necessarily continuous. Progress goes in a spiral manner. You can sometimes the spiral, as well as going up, it loops back down and then prepares to go up again. Sometimes in human consciousness, it's necessary to reach the depths, to fall to a really dark place. And the mother describes this as falling into a pit, and then it's as if you finally reach a spring below that then lifts you up again. I think in the recent years, I guess I can speak only to the United States, but I think probably social change was happening too rapidly for a lot of elements of society. It was sort of counter to some religious beliefs and some deeply ingrained social beliefs and patterns. Although some people saw all the changes and continued to see them as very enlightened and inclusive and widening. But I think some of them happened, or the movements moved forward too rapidly for some people. And so then there's this yearning for a return to a more known quantity, or what it was like, to personalize it myself, you could say, oh, I would like it to be what it was like back when I was a child. A lot of people have golden visions of the past. And in fact, Sri Aurobindo comments that, or writes in The Human Cycle, that for a conventional age, when people move past that in a society, they will look back on it sometimes in an idealized fashion as a kind of golden age. I mean, we look back sometimes romantically on the Renaissance or the Middle Ages for the beautiful aspects of those societies, the clothing, the arts, the level of craftsmanship, things such as that. Yet there were a lot of very dark things happening in those times that we can kind of filter out if we're looking back with a rose-colored lens. So it's so true that things are intermixed in every age. Yes, I was talking about how I think the conventional age is kind of, the commercial age, the economic age is kind of in a struggle against the coming of the subjective age. But I think you make a very good point that we have this drift towards the conventional age too.
This is
so intermixed.
Right. What is interesting here, what I observe all the time, and Schopenhauer says about this in the human cycle also, that these ages, starting from symbolic till conventional, they were protecting individual. They are protectors because they imposed some kind of ideal or type. They are typal, social consciousness is typal consciousness. It's not evolutionary. And this is quite interesting because it proposes certain barriers, certain grounds, certain protections, certain behavior, rules. You have to follow the rules. And the cult, you follow the cult. Culture, you follow the culture. You are not individualized being. You are not free to choose what you want, yes? But in the individualistic age, we have this shift where individual is to face all the dangers, choose the right and wrong for himself, not for the society anymore. And that is actually opened up to the forces, individuals, which we cannot easily handle. And that's why there's nostalgia about conventional age and protection and rules. And in Russia, people speak about Soviet Union, how good it was. It doesn't matter that they killed millions in gulags and concentration camps. It doesn't matter. It matters that it was safe. It was safe because you don't need to be individual anymore. You're fine to be a typal being. You behave as you are supposed to behave. So this shift towards this subjectivity is very dangerous path, very, so that's why most probably we have this mixed situation nowadays, that many people would like to go back to that security where they are in the social order, find their proper place. Of course, there is another great work of Jean Gebser, as you know, yes, the ever-present origin, where he speaks about, he has this concept of diaphaneity or transparency, where all the structures of consciousness will be efficiently present in the integral stage, in the integral structure. So when the integral structure emerges, all these other ages, as it were, will be efficient in a way. They will change their kind of structure and become they will start contributing to the development of the inner being, rather than contradicting every time, as we have nowadays, the fight between a religious mentality and scientific mentality, and so on and so forth. So there may be a structure where all these levels will become something else and will contribute to the development of human beings. And I believe that is the spiritual age, where the oneness is perceived and all the diversity is just welcome, because the oneness is pervading all the diversity. That was the ideal of Auroville, to become the place for human unity. By the way, the concept of human unity is not really easily understood. And if you start Googling it, you will find not many hits on this concept. I was surprised. A few years back, I Googled human unity, and I didn't find millions and millions references, as it is usually for any concept, because it is not really understood what it means. What is this
And also
human?
to consider this paradox of unity and diversity.
Right.
And that somehow we can respect the individual. And there's this lovely quote of Sri Aurobindo's about all problems being essentially problems of harmony. And I go to that musical metaphor, which he chose, because it is so intuitive. You hear the harmony and you know it. And you also hear the dissonance. And in the orchestra, each instrument is playing its own note. And that's fine. But somehow we, through very often manipulative power grabbing, project the shadow, fear the other, want to keep the black, the female, the not our self or our clan or our whatever club down in this competitive, I would say, destructive way. Because I think, as we look towards this involution evolution thing, there's a tremendous misunderstanding about competition and the survival of the fittest. And this wonderful work of Lynn Margulis in biology shows that it's through cooperation and collaboration that things really evolve. So we have some profound misunderstandings and miseducation in our culture, in our society, which generally has been out of greed and a false paradigm that gatekeepers create based on a misunderstanding of what the true nature of our purpose is on the earth. So Auroville is such a vast topic, and certainly Sri Aurobindo's thought. I want to paste for everyone in the chat some websites for more information about Auroville that people can copy and look at later. So if those of you who see that there's a chat window, I put in a few websites for further study that I hope people will copy and paste and use to explore the diversity of Auroville and follow the threads, whether they be ecological or spiritual or just there's this idea of Auroville being a utopia. I think of it as more of a pressure cooker. And there are great failures and difficulties, but every once in a while, something truly miraculous.
I can also, thank you, Julian. I can also see that Auroville undergoes the same kind of falling back to the conventional structures more in some way. There are too many committees, too many, parties, too many, even politics.
Yes, there was a wonderful quote from our dear secretary saying, "We've created a bureaucracy worse than India."
Right, right. That's true. There are too many committees, and they are all the time busy with something. And I do not know whether it is good or bad. When they approached the mother and asked her how could we accept people, give us some rules, some regulations that we could really apply and accept people or reject for Auroville, she said, as long as there are no rules and regulations, there is still a hope for Auroville. So it's exactly
she was
that.
Quite radical.
Yes.
Wonderfully so.
Right. Beautiful. Thank you for this. And of course, it's an immense topic. It's a beautiful, profound topic of our future. How the social structure will slowly change with the evolution of individuals within, whether that social structure will support the individual development and slowly change itself. Because as I understand, social structure cannot change by itself without the individuals, cannot change by rules and imposing rules on individuals. This is not the way to change. There has to be, all comes from individual, all creativity, all fresh perception. And that modifies the social structure, and that's how it changes. And even on the nation soul, Sri Aurobindo speaks in the evening talks. Somebody asks him about nation soul. He says it is not evolutionary being. Just think about it. It is a Shakti coming from the Supreme, from somewhere from the beyond, the spiritual power, which upholds and allows individuals to evolve to a certain level. But it is not evolutionary. Just to think about social as typal and individual as evolutionary beings and their interaction. And it may give us some glimpses what we have to see.
Well, I think that brings up the fact that has to be re-emphasized with all of the deluge of apocalyptic thinking and dystopian futures and negativity and the suffering of these so many people dying or going through the virus, that we have to remind ourselves of this. I think of it as the divine composter, taking all of our failures and all of our faults, and that even these divine typal beings need to be on the earth in order to take the evolutionary path. And so we've been given this tremendous privilege of being here now with all of the chaos, with all of the negativity. If we really take a moment to center ourselves, we should be filled with an immense gratitude to be participating and to be serving in some small way. A mother, even in talking about the work in the ashram, used the words "in our small way." You know, she had this humility, but was putting forth this possibility of human evolution and intuition and making a divine life on earth.
Beautiful, thank you. Would you like to say something, Martha? No?
I think Julian has expressed that beautifully. I think when we get really disturbed about the future, we must remember that we chose to be here now. You know, our souls chose to come to earth in this time. And these are the challenges that we were meant to face. And whatever knowledge we have was the knowledge that that our soul is able to recognize and live the truth of and benefit from. And it is a time of rapid evolution. Always difficulties are opportunities. And I feel a lot of hope for the future, especially because of the element of faith. And I wish everyone could have that confidence and that faith.
Thank you very much. It was very beautiful to meet with you and to hear your thoughts. And I hope we meet again and discuss these issues again. Namaste.
Happy
Namaste.
fall equinox. Thank you all for sitting in, those of you who stayed the whole time. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you, Vladimir. Thank you, Radha, HP.